नमस्कार सुनीलजी.
नमस्कार. नमस्कार.
आपल्याला भेटून मला खूप आनंद होतोय.
नमस्कार
आपण
विक्रम.
माझ्या
मला पण we are delighted that we are able to talk to each other. Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
येस. तर मला थोडक्यात आपल्या जीवन यात्रेबद्दल सांगा.
तर थोडक्यात म्हणजे असं सांगायचं तर माझा जन्म पुण्याचा आहे. आय विल मिक्स मराठी आणि हिंदी.
चालेल ना,
आणि मग
अवश्य.
त्याच्यानंतर मग लहानपणी आम्ही लहान असताना माझ्या वडिलांचा जॉब असा तो पहिल्यांदा निजाम स्टेटमध्ये होता, हैदराबाद स्टेटमध्ये. मग त्याच्यानंतर ते हैदराबाद स्टेटचं जेव्हा रिऑर्गनायझेशन झालं इंडिपेंडन्स नंतर, मग त्याच्यानंतर ही हॅड पार्टली जॉब इन कर्नाटका. मग तिथे आम्ही गुलबर्ग्याला पहिल्यांदा मी जन्मल्यानंतर गेलो तेव्हा मी अगदी बाळ होतो, लहान. आय वॉज अ लिटल चाइल्ड. पण देन आय स्टार्टेड स्कूलिंग ऍक्च्युअली इन अ प्लेस कॉल्ड जमखिंडी. आणि नाही, सॉरी, बिदर. So Bidar मध्ये I started going to school in the first standard, but then came to Jamkhandi for my second, third, fourth standard. So primary school was in Karnataka. Then my father went off to Maharashtra because we are from Maharashtra and he wanted to go back to Maharashtra. So he moved to Maharashtra and then he got a job in Bhandara in the government service. And he was a teacher by profession. He was a head teacher at a school in Bhandara. मग तिथे माझी 5वी 6वी 7वी झाली. मग त्याच्यानंतर आम्ही अकोल्याला आलो. मग अकोल्याला तिथे पण माझे वडील तिथल्या गव्हर्नमेंट स्कूलमध्ये हेड टीचर होते, हेडमास्टर होते. तर मग तिथे माझी 8वी 9वी 10वी झाली. 10वी मध्ये ऍक्च्युली आय वॉज इन मेरिट. आय वॉज इन द नागपूर बोर्डामध्ये, ज्याला आपण म्हणतो महाराष्ट्र स्टेट बोर्ड ऑफ सेकंडरी एज्युकेशन, त्याच्यामध्ये आय वॉज इन 5th इन द रँक that time. So I was a 5th rank holder. So but that was a long time ago. That was in in the early 70s, early 70s. Anyway, मग त्याच्यानंतर मी IIT खडगपूरला गेलो. I was lucky to get a place there, and I went to IIT Kharagpur and I graduated from there in mining. माझी एक बहीण आहे मोठी माझ्यापेक्षा 1 वर्षांनी, आणि माझे वडील 2002 मध्ये गेले. आणि माझी आई आहे अजून. शी विल बी 90 ऍक्च्युअली, इन फॅक्ट नेक्स्ट वीक ऍक्च्युअली. या 3rd of September.
आपल्या आईंना आमच्याकडनं शुभेच्छा, नमस्कार.
Same,
उत्तम आरोग्य लाभो जितके दिवस, आणि उत्तम दिवस, आणखीन अनेक वर्ष त्यांना आयुष्य लाभो अशी आपण प्रार्थना करू.
Very lucky to have very good health, and not just health, but her, she is very enthusiastic about things even at 90. So it's great. Yeah. So anyway, so I graduated from Kharagpur, and then in 77 I started working with Indian Explosives. Indian Explosives is part of Imperial Chemical Industries, as it was called in those days, ICI, which was a very big famous company in those days in India. Although it then later on bifurcated and completely finished. Even in the UK, there is no more Imperial Chemical Industries. They have gone. So anyway, so I started working for them on a project called Blasting Physics and Field Applications of Explosives. So because I was a mining engineer by training, so blasting was one of our main jobs for underground open cast mining and other civil operations, trenching, tunneling, etc., or even demolition of large structures, buildings, etc. So I started working for them on a research project, and this was mainly involved focusing on this terrestrial work, but somehow I got more and more interested in the underwater operations, underwater applications, as it were, of explosives. So there's something called the Monroe Effects. I was studying that, and it was used for trenching of the sea bottom for 2 or 3 purposes. One being the desilting or digging of the ports, because ports keep on getting silted, so they have to be made deeper. So you have to trench them occasionally so that big ships can come in or large ships can come in. And other thing is, of course, for laying pipelines and cables. So that was what I was more interested in. And I also got increasingly, sort of because of my marine interests, IIT Kharagpur was blessed with one of the largest number of specializations in the country even today. So that those days, IIT Kharagpur was the only department, the only IIT that had mining, but it also had naval architecture, it had architecture, it had so many other agriculture, engineering, so many branches that were not there in other IITs. So I was more attracted because of my ocean interest to ocean engineering and naval architecture. And a lot of my friends and colleagues also were from there. In 81, I became lecturer at IIT Kharagpur. So I was lecturer in mining, but my interest was in ocean mining that time. So I was developing the ocean interest. So it became ocean mining, because ocean mining was a what you call as a hot subject those days. It was very much in the vogue because law of the sea was coming up. It came in 1982, and it was being negotiated, and it was a big news those days. So ocean mining was a big thing. So I was into ocean mining. So a lot of my students did projects on ocean mining, undergraduate projects and postgraduate projects, etc. So I used to supervise those, and I used to lecture in mining. But within the first year of my lectureship at IIT, in the December of, I think, 1981, because I started in February, I came across a lady called Elizabeth Mann Borghese. And she became the biggest influence on me as far as my future career is concerned, as it were. So she became a big influence on me. And I had a chance meeting, actually, because basically I did not know about her. I had not heard anything about her. It was just that by chance, a friend of mine, I had gone to Goa for some work, ocean-related work, because the National Institute of Oceanography is based in Goa. So I went there in 81 December, and I met this friend of mine from Naval Architecture Department. And he was there. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm attending this course by International Ocean Institute." I said, "What is that about?" And he told me about it. And he said, "Oh, this is run by a lady called Elizabeth Mann Borghese." So I got in touch with her, and I said, "Look, I'm very much interested in these kind of things." So it took us time to get to know each other in 1982. And then in 1983, she invited me to come to Germany, Malta first, and then to Germany to attend a program on ocean mining. So that was a program specialized, 10 week or 12-week program. And that was in the spring of 1983. And that got me actually really deep into the business. And then we liked each other, we liked the program, and she said, "Oh, come again next year to Canada." So I went to Canada the next year, again in the summertime. And that was in exclusive economic zones, that course was. So I did these two courses. My professor and head of the department that time, and later deputy director of IIT Kharagpur, Professor Ramlu, was very supportive of me in whatever I did. And he gave me study leave, and he gave me leave of absence and everything without any problem. And then, in fact, 83, when I finished the Malta and Germany course and came back to India, in fact, the very next day I got married. So I got married to Smita. So Smita is my wife. So we've been married since 1983. And we have a son who was born in 1985, Sumed. So that completes our family. And so then 84, I attended that. And then 84 towards the, middle, when I came back after finishing the Canada program, my professor Ramlu was saying that, not much is moving in this direction in this country. So you may as well, start looking for some other stuff, as a good guide, as a good suggestion. And I had also in 1981, going back a couple of years, I had started with another professor at IIT Kharagpur, who was a vice chancellor of former vice chancellor of Jadavpur University. तर त्यांनी एक ओशन रिसोर्स डेव्हलपमेंट मॅनेजमेंट म्हणून ग्रुप सुरू केला होता, Senate group at IIT Kharagpur, and I was the secretary, he was the chairman, and we had gathered people from IIT Kharagpur working on that project. Now I'll tell you, so how it was an idea whose time had not come in 1981. So in 2009, IIT Kharagpur invited me back again. So that's after 29 years almost. Almost 30, 39 years. No, 29 years. Invited me back and said, "Oh, can you do something about ocean resource development and management?" So I mean, you see how idea that whose time has not come. Anyway, so I left IIT Kharagpur and joined metallurgical and engineering consultants in Ranchi. And I was actually the first designated ocean engineer in the country. I was called senior ocean engineer. There was no title called ocean engineer in India those days.
Wow.
I was the first ocean engineer in India. I worked with them for 4 years. I mainly worked on three projects. One was ocean mining. The second was renewable energy in the ocean, wave energy, tidal energy, etc., wind energy. And the third one was geotechnical studies, so basically seafloor geotechnical studies. So I worked on those three projects with them, and they were mainly working for Department of Ocean Development, National Institute of Oceanography, Department of Non-Conventional Energy Sources, as it was called those days, and so on. So I worked with them until 88. There again, I had a very good boss called Dr. Kaul. And Dr. Kaul was, he kept telling me, all the time. He used to call me Shastri ji, in those days when I was a very, very young man. So Shastri ji, यहाँ पे कुछ नहीं, अभी आप foreign चले जाइए, कुछ पढ़िए, कुछ, degree वगैरह कीजिए. So I applied to two places. I applied to Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, which you might have heard of, in Tufts University in Boston, Massachusetts. And the other place was London School of Economics. So London School of Economics were very generous to me. They gave me not only a full scholarship, but then later on they gave me a project funding for nearly 4 or 5 years. And they also paid for my wife and son to travel to the UK. They gave us a subsidized apartment in London, which is one couldn't afford otherwise to live in, second zone of London. So wow. That was excellent. So I came in 88 to LSE. Now our friendship in the meantime with Elizabeth Mann Borghese was going very strong, and she was very helpful to me all the time. She was an elderly lady already. When I first met her, she was already in her 60s. So, and I was a young man of like 25, 24, 22, something like that. But we became good friends, especially after I came to England, and because she used to be traveling all over the world. Many times she used to stop over in London, and she used to say, come and meet me. She used to call it a happy hour. Happy hour in the sense we sit down and have a drink or two. The happy hour used to be a couple of hours generally, but she used to call it happy hour. Let's meet for an happy hour, because she was a very busy woman. So getting 1 or 2 hours with her was big, So that was a great experience for me. And she was obviously, she was a luminary in the law of the sea. She's known as the daughter of Germany because her father was Thomas Mann, the Nobel laureate. And she was also, she's been awarded with the top awards of Germany and honorary nationality, etc., of Austria, Germany, and so on. She was an American national briefly. She was basically started off as a German national, then moved to Switzerland, then moved to the US, and then finally to Canada. So she was Canadian national when she, in her older days. So that was that. And then in 1994, I left the London School of Economics after working on the marine policy project for almost from 88 to 94, almost 6 years. And many other things in between. I used to be consulting at Chatham House at the Royal Institute for International Affairs. I used to work for LSE, of course. I used to do a little bit of work with the International Maritime Organization and so on. So I left that and then took a university position at University of Hull in 1994 in marine policy. So I became a lecturer in marine policy, or what you call as assistant professor in marine policy. And then eventually I became associate professor. So I was with them until a few years ago, until 2017, 2018. So that was my period of developing, really, because I was not only an academic in a university, but I had this connection with the International Ocean Institute. I had the connection with Elizabeth Mann Borghese.
Do you still live in Hull?
I still live in Hull, yes. Okay. So Elizabeth was very, very, very helpful to me many times. She used to, like I said, we used to meet very often, as often as we could, wherever we could meet. And then in the late 90s, I started to work. I got an idea that, nobody has, we have the Nobel Peace Prize. Her father had a Nobel Prize. That's how I got the idea. He had a Nobel Literature Prize, Thomas Mann. So I thought, nobody has a Nobel Prize in peace for the reasons of creating peace through environmental amelioration. Because so far, all the Nobel Prizes that were given are for war and peace. So you first create war. So you're a warmonger like Henry Kissinger, and then you create peace and then you get the Nobel Prize, or Andrei Sakharov, you create the hydrogen bomb and then you talk of peace and then you get the Peace Prize. Or Joseph Rodblat, and you work in the Manhattan Project and nuclear scientist, and then you eventually start talking about peace, then you get the Peace Prize. So that's how it's worked. It's always been about war and peace issues. But famously, actually, Mahatma Gandhi used to say that peace is not mere absence of war. And in fact, if you go back to the creation of League of Nations after World War I, that is talking about peace being absence of war. So according to them, if you have no wars, there'll be peace. But that doesn't happen, because peace has got other determinants, and the other determinants or other factors are equity, justice. Those are the things that contribute to peace, which is why my logo also has got that: people, planet, prosperity, equity, justice, peace. That's how the peace can be created. It cannot be created by mere absence of war. So what are the reasons that what are the conditions, what are the preconditions or factors that you need for creating peace? So when they created the League of Nations, they were focusing on war and peace issues. They learned a little bit after the Second World War, and they thought war and peace is not the important thing. Peace has to be there, but peace has to be created by doing something else. And that was, I'll just take this one call. Yeah. So when the United Nations came, they started talking about not just in terms of war and peace. They created what is known as the Economic and Social Commissions. There was the Economic and Social Commission. So there was the Economic Social Commission for Asia, Africa, Latin America, and so on. So the reason for that was they thought, yes, economic and society, those two are important focuses. So again, going back to people and profit, societies, planet, people, and economics is prosperity. So two P's were taken care of. But even the United Nations at that point in time did not even think about, let alone do anything about, but even think about the environment. When did environment come? Environment came much later. Environment came because of writings of people like the famous book. And now yeah. So the book basically is called Silent Spring. Okay. So Silent Spring was the book that started the environmental thinking, as it were. Now Silent Spring, I'm trying to remember the name of the author, but I'm not getting it. I'll get that, eventually. It'll come back to me. But you can find out. Silent Spring is a very famous book, came out in 1963. And that has, I'm just thinking now, because it's bugging me.
Her name was Rachel Carson.
Rachel Carson, yes. So Rachel Carson wrote that book, Silent Spring, which changed the thinking of many people, because she was working as a chemist. She was a chemist by profession. Of course, because you're a chemical engineer. So Rachel Carson was a chemist, and she was looking at the population of birds. She was suddenly struck and she was from California, and there was a lot of farming of course, industrial farming in California, and that was using huge amounts of pesticides and chemicals. And all that pesticides and chemicals was ending up in the sea. And of course, that was then consumed by the fish. And the prime consumers for the fish, apart from us human beings, are birds. And she found that in one season, all the eggshells of the birds were thinning. They were so thin that when the mother bird sat to hatch the egg were crushed, because normally the eggs would take the weight of the mother bird because they are the shells are strong enough. But because of these pesticides, and chemicals, the shells had become so thin that when the bird sat on it, so it was a devastating thing, not only for the mother bird, but also for people like Rachel Carson, who saw the silent spring. There was no chirping of the birds. That's why the name of the book, Silent Spring. So that is when environmental thinking started. The environmental knowledge was there much before. Things about extinction of fish came in the late 19th century. Somebody as important as T.H. Huxley, or was it Aldous Huxley? I can't remember. I think it must be T.H. Huxley, not Aldous. Aldous was a philosopher. So T.H. Huxley, he had said in 1884 at the Royal Society, he was the president of the Royal Society, no less. He was the president of the Royal Society. And he said, fish can be taken ad infinitum. This came from way back, going back to the times of the founder of the modern law of the sea, Hugo Grotius. Hugo Grotius very famously also said that, and this is in the 16th century, he said that fish can be taken ad infinitum. That means you can take as much fish today, and you can take so much fish tomorrow and the day after, and carry on doing that, and there'll still be fish. There are people who have written, of course, rather with a poetic license, that if you didn't fish cod for 3 years, you could walk from Liverpool to New York on the sea, because there'll be so much cod in the sea. So we know all those are fallacies now. All those are false promises. So that was in 1880. The entire thing that we are worried about these days, this whole idea of climate change or global warming or whatever you like to call that, that was already warned to us by Svante Arrhenius. Again, you would probably know that, a very famous Swedish chemist, Nobel laureate. And he wrote a paper in 1894 talking of global warming. So these things were old, but people did not think about it, and we were too busy in the Industrial Revolution. We were too busy in winning wars and creating the industrial, military industrial complexes around the world and becoming superpowers. So that was a busy time for everybody. People were focusing mainly on prosperity and occasionally on society. Nothing about the environment. So then came the 60s. In 60s also, of course, in 1965, what started the ocean movement, as far as I think I understand, was a book by John Merrow. John Merrow was an American engineer, a mining engineer, and he wrote a book called Mineral Resources of the Sea. And Mineral Resources of the Sea was a revolutionary book because it was read by this this new person now, who is called the father of the modern law of the sea. The father of law of the sea was Hugo Grotius. Father of modern law of the sea is a person called Arvid Pardo. Arvid Pardo was a Maltese ambassador to the United Nations, and he was what they call as an ambassador plenipotentiary. That means these people are ambassadors to many countries, because it's a small country, Malta is. So obviously they can't afford to have ambassadors in every country. So they decide plenipotentiary. So they have lots of countries as one ambassador. So he was an ambassador plenipotentiary as well as the ambassador of Malta to New York, to United Nations. So he read that book and he thought, in that book, John Merrow says that there's trillions of tons of manganese nodules at the bottom of the ocean. Trillions of tons of manganese nodules at the bottom of the ocean. So, and this is for the picking. It is lying like potatoes at the bottom of the ocean. It is not fixed to anything. All you have to do is pick it up. Obviously, it is at 4,000 meters depth, average depth. So getting it is not easy, but it can be picked. Like you can take a hoover and hoover it up, suck it up and collect it. Now, it was not important for the manganese. It is mainly main components, as you know, of manganese nodule are manganese and iron. But they are not the important one. The important one is copper, nickel, and cobalt. Copper, nickel, and cobalt. So that's what we wanted that for. Okay. So that became the hot property. And as a result of that, Arvid Pardo, who was a socialist kind of a person, he thought that should be a common heritage of mankind. This whole idea of Vinoba Bhave's Bhudan Yajna, giving the rich, giving to the poor, or Mahatma Gandhi talking about Antyodaya, Sarvodaya and Antyodaya. Sarvodaya means upliftment of all, and Antyodaya means the rise of the last man standing, last man or woman standing. So that was, so from those ideas came this idea, and Pardo was very influenced by Gandhi. And he basically wrote, he went to the United Nations, and on the 1st of November in 1967, he gave this very famous speech, a very long speech, in which he said his main refrain was that the seabed, the subsoil, and the high seas, they were common heritage of mankind. So that was the main thing, premise under which the law of the sea started. Then he got the Seabed Committee established in 1970, and the Law of the Sea Convention, or the, not the convention, the Law of the Sea Conference started in full earnest in 1973 in New York and concluded in 1982 in Jamaica. You know, so that is the journey. That is a long journey. But here now we are talking. So going back to this war and peace issues. So what I thought is that although these peace prizes were given for war and peace issues, and none was given for the environment. So I thought, why not Elizabeth be nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize for her work in bringing peace in ocean, because her motto also was Pacem in Maribus, peace in the ocean, which she took from the Pope's encyclical. Pope wrote an encyclical in which he called it Pacem in Terra, peace on the earth. But because our planet is not Earth, actually, our planet is planet ocean. You know, Roger Revelle very famously said that we know so little, our ocean is so big, and we know so little about it, that we know more about the backside of the moon than the bottom of the ocean. You know, he used the pun. We don't know much about, we know more about the backside of the moon than the bottom of the ocean. But Arthur Clarke, the science fiction writer, very famously, he said, it is so wrong, that we call our planet Earth, when actually we should be calling it planet ocean. So I thought this whole business of creating peace in the ocean and thereby creating peace in the world is something that Elizabeth has come out with. So why not work on a Nobel Prize for her? So from around 97 onwards until her death in 2002, I was working on that. So that became a passion for me. It became my pastime for me. So whenever I had free time, I would be focusing my attention to creating a document, getting it nominated by people. So in 2002, we had several hundred nominations. And of course, you have to have a certain type of people to be nominated. People have to be previous Nobel Prize winners. People have to be professors. People have to be members of parliaments, heads of states, heads of governments, and those kind of people. So there are 6 or 8 categories that the Nobel Committee prescribes. So we did that, and we were hoping very much that she would get the Nobel Peace Prize that year. But unfortunately, she died in February that year. In fact, she died within 10 days of my father. So she died on 8th of February. My father died on the 17th. So that became a time of change in my life. But going back to that point, I then recognized some years later, Wangari Maathai from Kenya got the Nobel Peace Prize. And hers was the first prize given to an environmentalist, because Wangari Maathai was famous for her green movement, in Kenya. And going back again now, I'm going back and forth, but well, the United Nations had nothing about the environment, I said, until about 1970. 1969, the late 60s were the times when there was what so-called the flower power generation. There were also these big strikes all over the world, particularly in Europe, at London School of Economics, in Paris, in UK, London, and other cities around the world. Student strikes were there for bringing equity in the society. The have-nots, helping the have-nots. Okay, and in New York, they had what you call as the Earth Day on the 24th of April, if I'm correct, in 1970. So this brought together like-minded, like-thinking people who pushed their governments and thereby pushed the United Nations to hold the first conference in 1972 in Stockholm in Sweden. And this was called the United Nations Conference on Environment United Nations Conference on Human Environment, UNCHE. Now that 1972 conference was the first time when people started thinking and doing something about the environment for the first time. And before that, people are thinking about it. People like Rachel Carson, people like Arvind Pardo, and so on. People like Elizabeth Mann-Borghese. But they start a point, and coincidentally, that same year, Elizabeth Mann-Borghese started International Ocean Institute. She established International Ocean Institute with that logo of Pacem in Maribus in 1972.
Amazing. So where was this? Was it in Canada? No.
Which
This was
one?
in Germany or
Which,
Switzerland, the institution she started?
the International Ocean Institute was started in Malta.
Malta. Okay. All right.
Just as she was my mentor, her mentor was Arvind Pardo, And Arvind Pardo, as I told you, was a Maltese man. So she started her institute in Malta. And of course, the institute developed, it had, if you ask me today, they have got dozens of centers all over the world, and they have got dozens of programs running all over the world all the time. But she was based in Canada at Dalhousie University. So anyway, so in 1974, as a result of the 72 conference in Stockholm, the UNCHE, in 1974, the United Nations Environment Program was established. So that was the first beginning of environmental action, as it were. And the other thing to remember about UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program, was it was the first UN body that was in a developing country. It is based in Kenya. Okay, so so the headquarters in Nairobi, because otherwise all the other UN organizations are mostly based in New York, and some are based in Austria and Vienna, and some are based in Switzerland. So I think it'd be New York, Switzerland, Vienna, Geneva, and Vienna. And then there's one organization in London, the International Maritime Organization, and so on. So very few otherwise in other places. So that was the first significant organization based in a developing country. And so going back to Wangari Maathai getting that, the reason I knew that Elizabeth would have got the prize in 2002 had she lived is because some of the words, some of the sentences for the citation that they had used for Wangari Maathai were kind of taken from the document I had prepared for Elizabeth Mann-Borghese's nomination. Now that document, after she died, became my obituary. It is published in Ocean Yearbook as my tribute to her.
Wow.
So that came out in 2004. Of course, the Ocean Yearbook 18 came out in 2004, and my tribute is called Elizabeth Mann-Borghese, a life dedicated to Pacem in Maribus. Peace in the ocean. So that, and then 2002 also simultaneously at that time, what happened was I was thinking, because I told you in February 2002, both my father and Elizabeth died within 10 days of each other. And I was thinking, because my father was a very good orator. He was a school teacher, eventually retired as Deputy Director of Education of Maharashtra State. But he was a great public speaker. He could speak in Marathi, English, and Hindi, and Urdu. And he was a poet, and he could write poetry also in Marathi and Urdu. So he was a public speaker. He used to love to speak in public, and public used to love to listen to him. And Elizabeth, on the other hand, was not a great public speaker, but she was a person with lots of fantastic ideas. She was a brainstormer, really. So she could come out with fantastic ideas. So I thought, let me pay some tribute to both of them by developing a lecture circuit. So I get a chance to speak, but I also as a tribute to my father, and I get to use Elizabeth's ideas. So it's a tribute to her. So as a result of that, and of course, with my mother's encouragement, because my mother is my most important teacher. Coincidentally, my father was born on 14th of November, which is Nehru's birthday. And my mother was born on Radhakrishnan's birthday, the 5th of September. So I have these two connections. My father born on Nehru's birthday, and my mother born on Radhakrishnan's birthday. So, and we celebrate those as Children's Day and Teachers' Day.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
What
So
a
anyway,
coincidence.
yeah. So I missed Mahatma Gandhi's birthday by 10 days.
Okay, that's all right.
Anyway, so uh, so I thought I should do something. So then that year in 2002 December, there was a conference in Paris in UNESCO to pay tribute to Elizabeth Van Borges. UNESCO, the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, held a conference in December of the year to pay tribute to Elizabeth Van Borges. So we were there, all her friends and students and colleagues and people like me, who I consider as a pupil or a tutelage. I call myself under her tutorship, or minion. I was her bag carrier, I used to carry her briefcase, give her glasses, give her a glass of water, find her pen for her, that kind of thing. So I was a little errand boy for her. So anyway, so we all were there at the conference, and then I made my speech, I paid my tribute to her, and came back and sat down after making my speech. And on the back of the program, the program paper, I wrote down 7 words, 7 phrases, as it were, and I called it 7 pillars of environmental and ocean governance, ocean and environmental governance. And I showed it to a lady sitting next to me. She was a professor in Portugal, English lady, but professor in Portugal. And I said, if I were to develop a series of lectures based on these 7 pillars, will there be any mileage there? Will there be any takers? Will there be people who will want to listen to me? So she said, Sunil, here is a challenge for you. This is December now. In the month of March, I am starting a new program, and I am looking for a new module, new course, 10 to 12 lectures of 30 to 36 hours duration. And if you can develop that, you are my man, you come and deliver it in Portugal, in Algarve, So that became my first, set of lectures in this subject. So the title came to my mind from the famous Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence of Arabia wrote a book called 7 Pillars of Wisdom. Now it's a very unreadable book. A lot of people have it on their bookshelf because it makes you look good. It's like, it's like Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time. Everybody has it on their bookshelf because it makes you look good. But nobody's read it cover to cover because it's difficult to read. So similarly, this book, 7 Pillars of Wisdom, it's a large book, and it's not an easy book to read. But I just picked up the title and I thought, okay, I'll use the 7 Pillars of Wisdom because I got these 7 ideas. So I developed this lecture circuit based on these 7 pillars. So these 7 pillars are science and technology, geopolitical economy, institutions and organizations, legislation and implementation, role of civil society, then financial initiatives, and finally, education awareness. So my firm belief is all of these are important, and there is nothing that falls outside the purview of these 7. Everything we do as human beings falls within that. So all of us are 1 pillar at least. We are friends of 1 pillar at least, maybe 2, maybe 3. Some of us, maybe more. Now, for you as a chemical engineer, maybe science and technology is 1, but all of us are part of civil society. So role of civil society, all of us are part of that. Some of us may be getting, how to get money for funding for projects. I always say, do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Yeah. Not because it is a populist thing to do, or not because it will win you the next election, or not because it will get you a next term as a chairman of our organization or something like that. But do the right thing because it is the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do. But if you want to do the right thing, you need money. Where do you get the money from? So some people are busy, fundraising. So they are very good at that. So some professors are very good at fundraising, So they will be a member of that third pillar. So like that, you could be a supporter, as it were, or you could be a pet pillar, if you like to call it. You could have more than 1 pet pillar. Now, for me, education awareness is my pet pillar, and all the other pillars are the supporting pillars. Now, for you, if science and technology is the pet pillar, science and technology will be a central pillar. Others are supporting it, and so on. So that is how I come out with this idea, and that became my sort of mainstay. And I then started to lecture about it, and I was quite lucky to get good mileage out of it, in the sense that
Are you still
I was,
lecturing on those topics, or have you moved on to other topics now?
those are my main things. So everything sort of revolves around that. So each one of those is a topic in itself. So what I would do is I would have 10 lectures based on those. Plus, because I was a lecturer at a university, I was doing teaching that the university wanted me to do. So I teach on subjects like ocean and coastal management. I teach on subjects like environmental economics and policy analysis. I talk about environmental resource management. I talk about global environmental issues. I talk about earth and environmental systems. So like that. So I have about, I talk about oceanography, although that is not really my focus subject, but I talk about it because I know quite a lot about it. I talk about polar science and polar law. So there are a number of subjects that I talk about. So I would say I have a repertoire of about, I would say about 10 modules in university terms. So 10 modules would be up to 300 hours of lecture time, up to 300 hours of lecture time. So that can be my repertoire. But my main focus is, for my public speaking, as it were, is this ocean and environmental governance, because that's what I have tried to focus on. So then slowly came the website, and slowly came the independent company that I started called Ocean Governance Limited. And that's how I work now. I have a three-pronged approach now to my work. So the first one is what I call as advice. So advice is something I will give it to anybody who will listen to me, and preferably who will pay me. That is how I earn my living now. So that is advice, and the advice is based on these 7 pillars of ocean and environmental governance. So advice is what you can call as my money earning vehicle, my livelihood, earning my livelihood. The second approach I have now is called advocacy. Advocacy is where I will talk about ideas, other people's ideas that excite me. So if somebody is, for example, one of the things that excites me nowadays a lot is universal basic income. You would have heard about it. So if somebody is giving me ideas about universal basic income, I will talk about universal basic income. I'll talk about their ideas, but I will do the speaking on their behalf, as on universal basic income, and the good and the pros of it, and how good it is, or so on. Or something like it is our moral duty to give, for example, giving. So why should we give in kind, cash, whatever you can, give your time, give your knowledge, give your money, give your experience, whatever. So giving. Giving is another important advocacy that I talk about, and so on. So there can be advocacies about all sorts of things. People say, oh, please, can you talk about, pollution of rivers, or, cleaning up of water, or whatever. So I'll be happy to talk about those kind of subjects, getting ideas from them, but also trying to speak to people about that. So that is advocacy. Now, advocacy is neither money earning nor money spending, in the sense that I try not to spend my own money unless I am too excited about it. Sometimes I'm very excited about it, so I might spend my own resources to do that. But most of the times I get expenses paid. Sometimes people are generous, sometimes people are wealthy, and they pay me fees also. So that is neither here nor there. So that is advocacy. And the third one, again from around 2002, with the support of my wife and my son, I decided that I will give 10% of my gross income, so that is pre-tax income, to some small good causes, because I don't earn a lot of money. So I can't give 10%, is not big amount-wise, but 10% is significant part of my income. It means that I have to change my lifestyle substantively to give that 10% away. So I do that on a yearly basis for the last 20 years almost, since 2002, for almost 18, 19, 20 years. So that is action. So advice, advocacy, and action. So those are my three-pronged approaches. And I focus on people, planet, profit. So I say that, yes, People have been ignored, planet has been ignored, profit has been focused on all along. And that's our nature. Our human nature is greed. So Mahatma Gandhi famously said that there is enough in the world for everyone's need, but not enough in the world for anyone's greed. So that's what Mahatma Gandhi said. I always think of this idea of a pin diagram. I call it positions, issues, and needs. So if you imagine, because I talk about ocean, so the example is about oceanic atolls. The volcanic islands. We have in the middle of the ocean. So what you see is the tip of the island on the top. The volcanic atoll. You see the tip of the island. Then you see water. You don't see the rest of the island. So if you take several islands nearby, those are the intransigent positions that people take. People take those positions. Because I am a physicist, I think the physics is the God's gift to mankind. Somebody is a chemist, they say chemistry is the God's gift to mankind. Somebody is a farmer, they think farming is the man's gift to mankind. Fisherman thinks the same. Politician thinks the same. Businessman thinks the same. So we have all taken these positions. These are positions. Okay. But then you go a little bit deeper. The island continues in the water, the volcanic atoll. Then you come to issues. Issues are common, more or less, to all of us. We all need the same thing. We all need the same air. We all need the same water. We all need the food. We all need clothing. We all need shelter. And if you go to the bottom, it is exactly the same for everybody. You cannot eat money. You have to eat food. So Indira Gandhi very famously, she had in my line of work at Stockholm, she very famously said that poverty pollutes and absolute poverty pollutes absolutely. That was a rephrasing of the power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. She rephrased that and she says poverty pollutes and absolute poverty pollutes absolutely. And that is true. But equally, affluence also pollutes. In fact, affluence pollutes more than poverty does. But the problem is affluence, the pollution produced by affluence can be taken care of by the affluent people. The pollution produced by the poor cannot be taken care of by the poor people. That is where the problem comes. And the pollution affects the poor people. So the pollution created by the poor people and the pollution created by the rich people, it is all affecting the poor people before it starts affecting the rich people. It is like, the impacts of climate change that you're seeing now. Which are the countries worst affected? They are called the UN OHR LLS. They're called. These countries are called UN OHR LLS. So this is United Nations Office of High Representatives for LLS countries. LLS is landlocked, least developed, and small island countries. So if you see around the world, the countries that will be the worst affected are the least developed, the landlocked countries, that means the countries that don't have the sea around them, and the small island countries. And they are the poorest of the poor countries. Some of the poorest of the poor countries are part of those three groups. And they are the worst affected. So the pollution may be created by the rich and powerful countries or the rich and powerful people, individuals, but it is affecting them first before it will start affecting them. So that is where the problem is. So those are some of the kind of things that I started to develop in my talks, in my thinking, in my ideas. And it is generally that three-pronged approach of people, planet, and profit, where I say that people have to be given more importance, but planet needs much, much more importance altogether. And profits will follow. And this has been shown by two quite big reports. In 2006, there was a report by my professor from London School of Economics, Nick Stern, Lord Stern, he's called. So Professor Nick Stern. So he wrote a report that's called Stern Review. His name is Stern, so it sounds good, Stern Review. It's a Stern Review or Stern Report, and the Stern Report is on climate change. and he talks about economics of climate change. Yeah. So he's talking about how one of the phrases he has there is environment makes economic sense. Eco as in the environment. Environment makes economic sense. So he says that. And he says that basically, yes, because as long as there is environment, Herman Daly, the environmental economist, says that environment is a wholly owned subsidiary of, environment is a wholly owned subsidiary of economics, not the other way around. We think economics is the wholly owned subsidiary of this one. It's the other way around. So that is what is important. So whether it's Herman Daly or
I would think, I would tend to think that economics is a wholly
the other way
owned
around.
subsidiary
The other
of
way
the
around.
environment.
Environment, yes, yeah, right. That's what Herman Daly said. Herman Daly
Right.
said economics is a wholly owned subsidiary of environment.
Correct.
Not the other way around. That's
Not
what
the
he
other
said.
way around.
That's what he said. That was his quote. I misquoted. And so similarly, this report that came, the Stern report, and then 15 years later, this year, in January this year, Partha Dasgupta, who's a very famous professor at Cambridge, he's a friend of Amartya Sen, but somewhat drawn apart now. So Partha Dasgupta has written a government report now, and they're big reports. Both Stern report and this report are like a few hundred pages. Now, in this one, this report is called Economics of Biodiversity. So he was talking about economics of environment or economics of climate change, and he's talking about economics of biological diversity. And so again, the more biological diversity you save, the more biological diversity you protect, the more there is for you to, in terms of economics. Yeah. Economics is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment.
The environment, absolutely. Unless there is biodiversity, there is a good friend of mine in Arizona. His name is Dr. Shailesh Rao. He has started an organization called climatehealers.org. Climatehealers.org. He's a systems engineer. He has a PhD from Stanford. And he is trying to bring environment and economics in a very fascinating manner. I think you might like to take a look at the kind of work he's doing.
I would be delighted to be introduced to him.
Yes.
And we could have developed some ideas together.
That would be fantastic.
My own, you can tell him my own organization is called Ocean Governance. My website is oceangovernance.org.
Absolutely.
So we can work on those kind of things. So that was the crux, sort of. So if you can have a balance, if you can have a balance between people, planet, and profit, with planet getting, I'll going back to biological diversity. Let me just tell you a very quick point here, that out of all the mammals, forget all the millions of other species, mammals I'm only talking about, of all the mammals, 60% are farmed animals. Farmed animals for what? Farmed animals for us to eat meat and to have dairy products. So that's the main purpose of farmed animals. So 60%, 36% are us human beings, 8 billion human beings. So that leaves only 4%, wild mammals. So all your elephants and zebras and giraffes and lions and tigers and all of those mammals, they're only 4%. So what have we done? What have we done to the earth? Reminds you of Michael Jackson's famous Earth song. What have you done to the earth? So, whether it's Michael Jackson, Mahatma Gandhi used to talk about, need of the people and the greed of the people. Only yesterday, Charlie Watts died from the Rolling Stones. And the famous Mick Jagger song from the Rolling Stones is
these singers, artists,
yes,
and humanitarians, they've all thought about this deeply.
Yeah,
And the
absolutely.
basis of it is expansion of the human consciousness.
Absolutely.
When we are working purely for our own selfish goals or selfish desires, then we will become happy to some extent, right?
Yes.
But when we expand our consciousness and we become more inclusive, when we do things for other people to make other people happy, then
Yes.
the happiness we get out of that activity supersedes the happiness
Yeah.
we get out of
From
doing something for
yeah,
selfish
for yourself.
reasons.
Absolutely. I
Yes,
mean, that famous Rolling Stone song, which is exactly what Mahatma Gandhi says. He says, you can't always get what you want. You know, Mick Jagger has written. So you can't always get what you want, but if you try, sometimes you can get what you need. So this business, I mean, this is another thing that always I always tell people, the difference between want and need. Our needs, like I said, what Indira Gandhi said, roti kapda makan. She said, roti kapda makan. That's the necessity for everybody, whether you are the richest person, whether you are Bill Gates, or whether you are a pauper. Roti, kapda, and makan, all of us need. We all need food, clothing, and shelter. Okay. Now, if you have that, then you can think about other things. If you don't have that, you can't even think about what's happening tomorrow. So when you talk about lofty ideas, when you talk about philosophy, when you talk about spirituality, all that is for Osho, Bhagwan Rajneesh used to talk about. We used to say that religion is opium for the masses. Religion is for the rich people. He used to say. Why? Because poor people can't have religion. Their religion is to find the food for tonight and for tomorrow morning. दिवसभर कष्ट केल्याशिवाय ज्या माणसाला भाकरी मिळत नाही, तो कसला रिलिजन आणि कसलं फिलॉसॉफी आणि कसलं पोएट्री आणि कसलं लिटरेचर काय करणार?
correct, exactly.
So I think that is what it is. So this whole idea of people, planet, and profit, and then you have to create equity. Equity is where these three things are balanced. Your planet is taken care of, your people are taken care of, and if you take care of those two, the prosperity will automatically follow. The prosperity will automatically follow, as has been shown by our so-called, many developed Western countries. If you see Britain, if you see the United States, also particularly the New England part where you come from, Pennsylvania, the Eastern United States, the forests today are better than the forests in the year 1500. In the UK today, there are more forests than they were in the year 1500. Why? Because until that time, lots of forests were cut for shipbuilding, for burning, and for construction of homes. Now, increasingly, you don't need to use so much wood for shipbuilding. Yeah.
This has been such a wonderful pleasure talking to you and learning about your life's journey, as well as the fundamental principles based on which your life has been lived so far. I would love to continue this conversation, and I would like to invite you once again to chat with me, and we will have another conversation just like this. Extremely happy to have met you and to have had this wonderful conversation with you. Thank you so much for spending.
My pleasure too. If you give me just 2 more minutes, I'll just conclude by saying 2 things that I want to say.
Please.
First one is how our narrative has to change. If you see my website, I say our whole thinking has to change, and the change has to come from within. Yeah, not imposed by somebody. The change has to come from within, and each one of us has to be the agent of change. And of course, I've told you earlier that do the right thing because it's the right thing to. So narrative has to change, because our narrative in the old days, so far, our narrative has been that the earth is too big to fail. The planet is too big to fail. Okay. And we have known now that the planet is failing. So that means that first narrative was wrong. The second narrative that we have now is that, it's so big that I cannot do anything about it. It's too big to do anything about it.
Right. And I think both these narratives we have to fight.
Yeah.
And then
So the third narrative, which is the correct narrative, is the planet is too big to ignore. And you can only ignore it at your own peril, because it is a protect the planet that provides, another PPP, protect the planet that
fantastic.
provides. So that's number one. And the second thing that I want to say is, now I'm 65 years old. I'll be 66, in fact, in the month of October. So that'll be half and half time spent in the India and here. Now what I want to do hereafter is to spend as much of my remaining years, as much of that time in India as much as possible, with the intention that I want to start something called the Indian National Center for Ocean Governance.
Fantastic.
Okay. So Indian National Center for Ocean Governance will be the first of its kind center in India, at a place, at a host institute that will accept me and my ideas. And I want to create a postgraduate teaching program there, a mid-career teaching program there, lifelong learning, mid-career training, etc.
Fantastic.
Research, consultancy, and development of ideas in the area of ocean governance.
That would be awesome.
That is my aim in life now, and my
Great.
focus is only that now. That is my total focus now for the last couple of years.
Fantastic. So I would love to chat with you on these topics in our next conversation. Have a wonderful evening back home in England, where you are right now. And I look forward to talking to you soon.
Great pleasure.
In the near future. Bye-bye.
Great pleasure, Vikram. Thank you. Bye-bye. Namaskar.